What if a facehugger attacked another facehugger? What would happen then? To speculate, let's imagine an experiment by the android David involving facehuggers. Let's begin. David, on board the Covenant ship, was engaged in a complicated and delicate surgical experiment. Using advanced surgical equipment, David was meticulously operating on a facehugger still dormant within its egg. The surgery was being conducted inside a sealed containment space, with David utilizing remotely controlled surgical arms within this sealed space to carry out the procedure. And he was controlling these acid-resistant surgical arms from a panel in the lab outside the sealed area. David figured that the best way to see what would happen if a facehugger attacked another facehugger would be by removing the plagiaris prepotens from one facehugger and surgically implanting it into another. Plagiaris prepotens, by the way, is the highly mutagenic substance introduced by a facehugger into potential xenomorph hosts to create a chestburster. David had opened the facehugger egg from the side, his hands steady as he manipulated the surgical arms to carefully pry apart the thick, fleshy walls of the ovomorph. The dormant facehugger lay within, lifeless and inert, its spindly legs tucked in tight. The android then shifted his focus to the small sac of plagiaris prepotens, the one he had extracted from another facehugger. Holding it carefully in the surgical arms, David proceeded to insert it into the internal cavity of the dormant facehugger. With mechanical precision, David deftly removed the barrier that surrounded the newly introduced sac, allowing the potent black mutagenic fluid to slowly begin merging and interacting with the facehugger's internal systems. His task complete, David carefully sealed up the sliced open part of the facehugger egg, ensuring the incision was closed securely. He then ended the procedure, retracting the surgical arms with a satisfied gleam in his synthetic eyes. David carefully inspected the sealed egg, satisfied with his surgical craftsmanship. He allowed himself a small smile, a semblance of pride as he turned his attention to the control panel before him. With a flick of his synthetic fingers, David adjusted the temperature inside the containment chamber, increasing it ever so slightly. The rise in temperature would stimulate the biological reactions needed for the facehugger to wake. Like a macabre puppeteer, David watched as the once lifeless form began to twitch. The spindly appendages that had lain inert slowly extended, and the facehugger stirred, responding to the environmental cues. Now it was time for the next phase, to trigger the creature's instinct to find a host. David activated a compartment within the containment space, revealing a decoy that closely mimicked the physiological signals of a viable host. This contraption, resembling a small drone, emitted thermal and auditory signatures akin to a human body. David's design was flawless, carefully calibrated to draw out the predatory instinct of the facehugger. He watched from behind the reinforced glass as the egg, almost as if sensing the proximity of prey, began to respond. There was a minute tremor followed by a rapid surge of activity. With a sudden motion, the fleshy petals of the egg unfurled, exposing the dormant horror within. The facehugger reacted swiftly. In an explosion of frenetic energy, it leaped from its containment, latching onto the decoy host. The once inert creature was now fully animated, its legs wrapping around the decoy in a grotesque embrace. With the decoy ensnared, David input a command into the control panel. In response, the host went inert, its thermoauditory signals shutting down entirely. With the host going inert, the facehugger released its grip, dropping from the decoy. It began to scuttle around the bright, transparent containment chamber, its long skeletal legs clattering against the surface. As the facehugger scurried around the containment chamber, David monitored its movements with keen interest. The creature's behavior was erratic, its search for a host becoming increasingly frantic. Unbeknownst to the facehugger, the mutagen, the plagiaris prepotens, that David had surgically implanted was beginning to take effect. On his control panel, David observed real-time scans displaying unusual cellular activity within the facehugger. The mutagen was initiating rapid mutations, causing certain cells to replicate uncontrollably. These aberrant cells began to form clusters, as if an entirely new organism was gestating within the facehugger itself. Suddenly, an alert flashed on the screen. The facehugger's original mutagen sac had ruptured. The rupture released more of the potent substance into the creature's system, accelerating the mutation process. David's synthetic eyes flickered with fascination as he watched the underbelly of the facehugger start to distend. The once agile creature began to slow down, its movements becoming sluggish. Yet, it remained alive, its legs twitching intermittently as it struggled to comprehend the changes occurring within its own body. Hours passed, and the expansion in the facehugger's abdomen became more pronounced. David noted that the creature was now almost stationary, conserving its dwindling energy. The scans revealed complex structures forming inside, a tangled web of mutated tissues and embryonic limbs. The internal growth was now displaying its own vital signs, separate from the host facehugger. Suddenly, the overstressed exoskeleton of the facehugger ruptured with a wet, tearing sound. From the opening emerged a new organism, forcing its way out with a blend of desperation and instinctual drive. This creature bore a twisted resemblance to its progenitor, but was a hideous deviation in many respects. The new entity possessed 8 elongated, spider-like legs, much like the Facehugger, but these limbs were thicker, jointed in multiple additional places, and ended in sharp, talon-like claws. Its central body was more robust and elongated, covered in a semi-translucent exoskeleton that shimmered with a sickly sheen. Beneath this outer layer, intricate networks of muscles and pulsating veins were visible, hinting at the powerful physiology developing within. Unlike the Facehugger, whose mouth was located on its underside, this creature featured a horrifying oral structure at the front of its body. The mouth was a gaping maw lined with several concentric rows of needle-like teeth, reminiscent of a lamprey or some deep-sea nightmare. This oral cavity could extend outward, revealing a secondary set of jaws within, each equipped with their own serrated teeth. From the rear of its body extended a long, whip-like tail, composed of segmented, chitinous plates. The tail was prehensile and ended in a vicious barb that secreted a glistening, acidic fluid. Along the sides of its body, small quivering tendrils or sensory organs protruded, twitching as they detected minute changes in the environment. As the creature acclimated to its surroundings, David observed with a mix of fascination and clinical detachment. As he watched, the creature began to move slowly around the containment chamber. The sensory tendrils quivered incessantly, guiding it toward the biomaterial that David had strategically placed within the enclosure. Upon reaching the nutrient-rich substance, the creature did not hesitate. It anchored itself with its rear legs, while the front portion of its body reared up, allowing its mouthparts to descend upon the food. The inner jaw shot out, tearing chunks of matter and drawing them into the gullet. As it fed, the creature's exoskeleton seemed to pulse and stretch, accommodating a sudden and rapid growth spurt. David monitored the real-time scans with heightened interest. The creature was assimilating the biomaterial at an alarming rate, its mass increasing exponentially. The semi-translucent exoskeleton began to darken, layers of chitin reinforcing its exterior. Musculature expanded, and the tail grew longer and more articulated, its acidic secretions becoming more potent. Within hours, the creature had surpassed the size of the original Facehugger. Its form became more defined, yet increasingly aberrant. Bony ridges formed along its spine, and spines protruded from its joints and tail. The sensory tendrils elongated, whipping around as if tasting the very air. However, alongside this growth, signs of instability became apparent. The creature's movements grew erratic. At times, it would convulse involuntarily, its limbs jerking spasmodically. The scans revealed chaotic activity within its cellular structure, rapid mutations causing internal systems to malfunction. Organs were forming and dissolving unpredictably, and its metabolic rate fluctuated wildly. David observed cracks forming along the exoskeleton of the creature. Thin cracks oozed a luminescent acidic fluid that dripped onto the chamber floor. The acid pooled harmlessly, emitting only small plumes of vapor upon contact. The containment chamber had been constructed using advanced polymer composites and a graphene-based lining, materials specifically engineered to resist even the most potent corrosive substances. David continued his observations. The creature's exoskeleton began to fracture more extensively, the fissures widening as the internal pressures of uncontrolled mutation escalated. The creature's grotesque mouth, situated at the front of its body, gaped open. It emitted a series of guttural sounds, a disturbing mixture of hisses and clicks that resonated within the sealed chamber. The sensory tendrils along its sides flailed wildly, as if overwhelmed by the influx of stimuli or internal distress. As it scuttled around, the creature's prehensile tail whipped against the walls and floor. The acidic secretion at its barbed tip splattered with each strike, but the resilient chamber materials remained unscathed. David introduced additional biomaterial into the chamber, observing how the creature responded. Driven by a primal hunger, it lunged toward the nourishment. The nutrient intake fueled further growth spurts. Its musculature expanded, and new layers of exoskeleton materialized, darker and more robust than before. Yet, with each surge in growth, the genetic instability intensified. The creature's form became increasingly distorted. Bony protrusions erupted from its joints and spine, and its limbs grew unevenly, causing a noticeable imbalance in its gait. One of its legs elongated significantly compared to the others, leading to awkward, lopsided movements. The scans displayed alarming data. The creature's cellular activity was in turmoil, with DNA strands fraying and recombining erratically. Mitochondrial functions were failing, and energy production became unsustainable. The internal pH levels fluctuated wildly, further contributing to the breakdown of biological processes. Recognizing the critical state of the organism, David considered intervening. However, his programming dictated the importance of observing the natural progression of the experiment. The creature was a living testament to the consequences of unbridled mutation, a physical embodiment of the chaotic potential locked within the Plagiaris praepotens when misapplied. Suddenly, the creature convulsed violently. Its limbs splayed out as it collapsed onto the chamber floor. The sensory tendrils stiffened and then fell limp. The exoskeleton began to crack extensively, web-like fractures spreading across its surface. Luminescent acid seeped from these new openings, but again, the containment chamber's advanced materials prevented any damage. David watched intently as the creature's life signs waned. Its attempts to rise were futile. The mutations had rendered its body incapable of sustaining itself. The internal structures were failing, a collapse of vital systems that could not be reversed. With a final shuddering breath, the creature became motionless. The laboratory's environmental controls activated automatically. Specialized drones entered the chamber to neutralize and collect the remains. The drones methodically gathered samples, which would be invaluable for further analysis. David began reviewing the extensive data collected throughout the experiment. The creature's morphology, while aberrant, provided significant insights. The creature's inability to maintain structural and genetic stability highlighted the necessity of a suitable host in the xenomorph life cycle. Without the appropriate biological framework provided by a host organism, the mutations induced by the Plagiaris praepotens led to unsustainable development. Then, as he stood there, an intriguing possibility surfaced in David's synthetic mind. The black mutagenic substance created by the engineers on LV-223 might hold the key to stabilizing the organism, he thought. This substance had shown unparalleled capabilities in rewriting genetic codes and accelerating evolutionary processes. Perhaps by introducing a controlled amount of it to the unstable organism, he could guide the mutations toward a viable form. David stood there, pondering this idea.